Engine repair test 19-20. And we're going to go into this one a little faster than we did the other one. In newer vehicles, the fuel lines are often fitted with quick disconnect fittings. Now, that's not hard to remember because everybody's been there. Quick disconnect fittings. Can I pause for a second and tell you guys, hey, Todd, can I pause for a second and tell you guys that if you don't have tools to take fuel lines loose and stuff like that, those tools don't cost that much. And it's just really not very slick to borrow that stuff from the guy in the next toolbox. There's a ton of stuff on there. Mm-hmm. I asked them about that.
I just used all of them.
Yeah. I asked them about that, and they said, oh, that stuff's bound to be in the mail or something like that. Oh, you just giving me the half?
Oh, crap. Here you have the whole.
Oh, oh, thanks, bud. Appreciate that. Toss that in there on the desk there. I think I got part of yours.
You can have
Don't you get that one?
I'll throw it away.
Oh, you did? Okay. Well, let's stuff on this one. Thank you, sir.
Sir.
All
See you
right.
next week.
All right.
Happy 4th.
You too. Okay. Anyway, I used to have people that come over to my side of the shop, and they would say, let me borrow your fuel line disconnect tools. And I say, are you going to buy some the next time a tool truck comes? And they would just stand there tapping their foot. Well, you need to do that because if you ain't got the money to buy tools to do what you do every day, you need to be in some other business. You know what I mean? Have what you need and stay the heck out of other people's toolboxes. That's what I'm telling you. You know, when you're working in a shop where everybody's supposed to be his own man. Now, occasionally you have a couple of yo-yos that swap tools back and forth a lot and they work together. But I used to work next to a transmission mechanic and had been working in that shop for 20 years. And he was the tool borrowingest son gun I ever seen. I mean, from the time I went to work next to him, he would find out what I had that he could use, and he'd take my stuff and use it. And, I didn't want to be a jerk. At that same time, I had some respect for the guy because he's done a heck of a lot of work and been in the shop a long time. But good grief, let's get real here.
You ever bring tools back?
No. And I'll tell you what, I had a pair of channel locks, really nice pair of channel locks that had a nice little set of curved jaws. And you know how you're having to pop them shift linkages out of the transmission? That's sort of a pain sometimes. Well, them channel locks work real good. You just pop them right out. And so he kept coming to get them because he did transmission work all the time. And I said, I tell you what, Billy, I said, you're using those more than I am. Why don't you just keep them and I'll come get them if I need to? And he goes, okay. So he had them over there for a while. And then one day, I went back to the back of the shop, was headed out the back door for something, and the shop was like 100 yards long or something huge, I was headed out the back door, and my pliers were laying on top of the steam cleaner. Had my name on them, Richard. I had written it with an engraver, And I said, what the sound are these doing back here? So I picked them up and put them back in my toolbox. And I said, Billy, you got them? He was a foul-mouthed son of a gun. I said, you got them pliers that I loaned you? Cuss. Never mind. Don't get mad, I mean, that was his defense mechanism. He had lost them, and the way that he made me go away was cuss, just start throwing us a rant and all. I said, that's fine. No problem. He was a wormy little skinny guy about the size of Jeremy. But anyway, he was, well, you got a right to be wormy and skinny. You're only 17. But anyway, he was actually, I did not tell him anymore that I had those pliers. I mean, I didn't even mention to him that I found them back there on the steam cleaner. And he never asked to borrow them again. See, so that problem took care of itself. Well, there was a transmission disconnect tool. That's what made me think of this. You could disconnect transmission lines on the Fords. It's a little circular shaped tool where you slide it in and unsnap it.
Same way with the fuel line.
OTC. This one here was made just for transmission lines on some Fords. And he had one that belonged to the shop. So Ford sent one as a special tool, essential. And they let him hang on to it. And I said, well, that's a cool little tool. I had never seen that before when I went to the Ford place in the mid-'80s. And so I said, that's like awesome. Go to the tool truck. Hey, tool truck guy, you got one of these? He goes, yeah, I got one of them, $11. So I shut down $11 and had a little OTC fuel line disconnect tool. Cornwell guy, I think. If I remember right. So I got it from. So I put it in my toolbox and all that kind of stuff. And I told Billy, I said, I don't need that one you got anymore. I got mine. Well, he lost that one. Then he started coming to get mine. And so he kept using mine and kept using mine and kept using mine. I said, crap, I get so tired of this. So I went to the tool truck. I bought another one. And I said, Billy, you can have that one. I'm just going to let you keep that one. I'm going to have this one right here. Because, if it irritates you a little bit when somebody comes to borrow your stuff, sometimes if it's not a really expensive tool, the best thing you can do is just give them that one and get you another one so you don't get mad and turn into a jerk, you see.
I love it.
But anyway, the point is, this guy, he lost the one I gave him and was still coming to get mine. And so this happened over and over. My transmission funnel, this one guy, everybody had a transmission funnel just a lot because the BG man gave us all a really nice transmission funnel. This one guy took his to the house, and then he wanted to borrow mine. I mean, because it was one that the BG man gave us. And then he lost mine, and none of us had one. Sorry, this kind of thing. Good grief. Don't take a mess with you wherever you go. All right, I got sidetracked again. I'm sorry about that. Okay, now. Number two, before removing the engine from the vehicle, a technician should carefully inspect the powertrain for leaks and identify the source. You doggone sure better. Because the worst thing in the world is to pull one out and do some work on it and put it back in, and then you find out you got freeze plugs or rear main seal leaking or something that you could have fixed real easy while you had that thing out. And customers frown on that. They don't even want to pay for that second repair. And that is absolutely true. The ring ridge should be removed while the piston is in the top dead center position. To begin with, I have not seen a ring ridge in any cylinder in any engine that we've worked on in the last 10 years.
I've never seen it.
Well, in the older engines, and they talk, every single one of these tests talk about ring ridges. If you got an old 350 and somebody put 140,000 miles on it and it was one from the 1960s, you're probably going to have a ring ridge that's pretty deep right behind where the water pump is. That's just usually the way it is. And that ring ridge can be so deep that you can't get that piston out of there. When you try to knock a piston out of a bam, they'll hit that ring ridge and the rings will, and you just can't get it out.
It's at the bottom of the sun?
It's at the top of the travel. It's where the rings stop every time the piston comes up. It will actually make a ridge right at the very top. And we used to, whenever we pull a head off one, I mean, it's back in the 70s when I first started, we pull a head off one, the first thing we felt was that ring ridge. And if it was bad enough, we'd have to have a ridge. I've got a ridge rimmer in my office in there, but we had to use it a single time. And, I'm really supposed to teach you guys to ream ridges as an ATEF task, but I don't have any ridges to ream. You know what I'm saying? I guarantee you could feel them cylinder walls on that when he pulled off at a Honda. It ain't got an area ridge of any kind.
Why did they do that?
What?
Make the ridges.
The older pistons had really tight, thick rings that were fit really, really tight against the cylinder walls, and they just literally would, dig themselves a ridge.
I don't like the way they run them that cooling system on that Honda out there.
Yeah, that's like a Chevrolet Vega was like that, and the Cadillac 4.1 is like that. A lot of cars like that. When you pull that head off, and the Nissans are like that. When you pull that head off, you can see the entire cooling jacket all the way around.
I don't like that.
Yeah. But I mean, those aluminum.
I like Vegas though. I just like the way they look.
Yeah. Well, the Vega was a pretty car, but it had the sorriest engine known to man in them.
Yeah, but you could throw.
And they had an electric fuel pump in them. Electric fuel pump feeding the carburetor. It was a crazy thing. And Mike Chancellor always used to say they had to tool up and redesign to build something sorry. As far as the motor, they had an Aaron Duke. 4-cylinder. It was a really good motor they could have put in there. We're not going to use that one. And but anyway, that was a horrible mistake. That Vega engine, the way they put it together. Anyway, anybody that remembers that stuff,
you just throw a 350 in it and it'd be all right.
Oh yeah, I mean a lot of people did that. They throw a big old V8 in it, or whatever. And I had a guy that I worked with that did that kind of stuff at home, and he was good at it. He'd put big Chevy Love truck. He had a 350 and all that stuff. All right. When removing, let's see. Number 3 is false. When removing core plugs, which is what we call a freeze plug, it's actually a core plug. Drive them back into the block and then try to grab them with pliers. That is a bad way to do that. What you're supposed to do is and some of you guys have done that already in here, is you knock that thing around sideways. Go to the edge of it and knock it around sideways and pop it out of the hole like that. If you knock it back into the block, you may not be able to get it out. I mean, what I'm saying, you honestly may not be able to get that sucker out of there. And if it lays in there and it makes a hot spot, because the coolant can't circulate good, you got issues with that. So don't knock it back into the block. You're supposed to knock it around sideways if you can. And I used to do this, I used to take aviation Permatex and paint the inside surface of them core plugs where I put them in there so that maybe they wouldn't rust out quite so bad. And so I mentioned that to Curtis, one of my guys that was working with me. And he's the guy that used to put all the motors and things. I said, what do you think of painting this Permatex on the back of these plugs? Don't make them last longer? He said, I don't know. That cadmium plating looks to me like it'll last longer, but it gets rust off of there. Number 5, if a main cap is installed backwards, it can cause the crankshaft to seize. Zach, do you remember what you've ran into on that Escort?
Yeah.
Engine wouldn't turn because the main caps were on backwards, 3 of them. You know what I mean? Huh? Yeah, that engine you tore apart. You didn't do it. You fixed it. You remember? You were out there and you're doing that timing belt in the head and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then I said, pull the pan and let's look at those. And he found out that 3 of the 5 main caps were on backwards.
I thought it for a final.
I thought you were saying
No, it wasn't a final. It was basically, we actually had then just tore some engines apart and put them back together. I think some of the high school guys did it. But I mean, sometimes when I'm saying something that's really important, make sure you put the caps on the right, the tangs have to be together, the pistons have got to be facing the right way, and all that kind of stuff. And then I come back later, and they just put the pistons in there any other kind of way, and just cram them things on there, and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, Zach straightened it all out. Whenever he pulled them all and put them back on there right. Zach thought I was fussing at him, but what I was getting to say is, you've seen this.
What was happening? I was like, what?
Well, you've seen that. You remembered it because I figured you'd remember it because you had to go back and fix what somebody fouled up. When bolts or nuts won't loosen easily, the technician should try doing what? They usually. What do y'all usually do? Y'all usually come get me, don't you? Right. Number six. And when
Use a larger tool.
When bolts or nuts will not loosen easily. Now listen to this. Now you saw this. What we did. Number 6A, tightening and then loosening them. Now you remember when we were fighting with that on that Honda. I says, just pull the balancer off, and then you can get to the rest of the bolts on the cover. So he's over here, and they had a thing in the book about this big old tool that was hexed that was supposed to hold the balancer
Hang
still.
on now. I've been hitting it with 3 different impacts for 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And then what I did was, I put the impact on forward. I don't know if you saw me do that or not. And let it hammer, and I saw it move a little bit that way, and then when I put it in reverse, it came on off. But for a long time, he was. And if you're going to try to take something off that's super, super, super tight like that, don't put an extension on it. If there's any way you can do it without an extension, you need to have the shortest sockets you can get, and it needs to be an impact socket, obviously. You should never use anything except, I don't go, there's a mechanic on the planet that hadn't broke that rule. They use chrome sockets on an impact. They're not supposed to do that because they can explode and get in your eyes and all that kind of stuff. But the impact, these malleable steel impact sockets are the black ones. Get the shortest one of them that you can get, a really good one, and stick that impact wrench up in there. And I tell you what, that thing was separating the men from the boys on impact wrenches because that impact wrench was turning the engine in that thing that went. And of course, Sean came up with an idea that would work fine if it wasn't a Honda. And the reason, he says, why don't we put this breaker bar on the nut and then let it get against the frame and bump the motor over? Well, that's okay, but the motor's in there Honda backwards. And the motor always turns the way the car goes. So all that's going to do is tighten the bolt. See, so you couldn't hardly do it that way. My son had his Toyota Camry that got the damaged in here the other day. He was pulling having his buddy at the shop up the road, and he lives in Augusta. And that guy was, this guy was tough. This guy he had working on it. He was a tough son of a gun. That thing was so tight that putting a wrench on there and bumping the starter wouldn't break it loose. He was trying to rip the motor mounts apart. And you know what he did? He got a doggone torch and cut the washer out from behind the bolt to get it off there.
He did what now?
He got a torch and he cut that thick washer. He cut it from behind the balancer bolt and just took it out that way. Which is pretty dicey. You couldn't hardly have done that on that Honda because it's up in the hole, But that's what he did. He cut that washer out from behind there, which I thought was pretty daggone interesting.
Because all the torque was on that one.
Yeah. Well, it was, but if you take the washer out, there's no pressure anymore. See, it's gone. Anyway, that was just there's some of this stuff that you got to kind of know how to do. Now, think about it. The person that wrote these questions of this book is a woman, female technician, Elizabeth Dorries. She's fixed cars for years and years and years, and she wrote a doggone good textbook. You got to, this is a good book if you've done any reading in it. Technician A says to prevent electrical sparking or damage when removing an engine, the technician should disconnect the positive battery cable.
No.
Well, you really ought to disconnect the negative one. Well, that's the one you're supposed to do. Technician B says the technician should check the manufacturer's recommendations before attempting engine removal. Yeah, it's best, guys, to get in your book and find out. You know how many door panels get broke because people don't look up how you pull them out? Some of them you just pick them up, and some of them you have to pop them off with a tool. So if you get the tool and you try to pop off some of the ones that you're picking up, and then there's other things. What you don't want to do is start pulling your motor out and then find out, oh, I forgot to unhook that. Rip. Oh, gosh, now we got to have that part too.
We did that. That video I was telling you about, I had an S10 I had motor oil and all that in it. Yesterday he decided he's going to pull the motor out. I'm like, okay, go ahead. I'll sit there. I just pulled up. Truck goes this way, the motor goes this way, the wire harness does this.
Oh, no. Rip the wire harness
He
apart.
forgot to undo it.
Good grief. Now he's got some issues.
He just sold it for like $20. The old truck. He
Huh?
wasn't worth $20.
Yeah.
He ripped it out, the chain broke, it hit the thing, cracked the block, and ripped the wiring harness out. The
I
transmission
ripped the
started
wiring
firing.
harness, had up to 350
Yeah.
sold it 500.
That woman worked with me up there. She said my husband was pulling the motor out of a Mustang yesterday at home, and he got kind of worried when he got the motor halfway out because the board was breaking. Apparently, he was using a 2x4. I mean, he wasn't using a piece of wood that was strong enough, you know. Now, a lot of the guys that I knew when they would work on one at home would have a tree. I mean, this was literal shade tree stuff.
Yeah.
They have a big old oak tree there, and they have a chain fall on it.
That's why they do that.
I mean, that works, you know. And who in here has not worked on one under a tree? You know, I've done it.
I have.
Yeah.
You for it? No, I ain't
Did it in the yard, yeah.
You ever put one of them
We're under the tree.
toe blocks on the tree?
Yeah, those
Use it
are
to pull the engine out?
Yep, that works. Or yeah, come along too. All right. Number 9. Let's see.
Number 9.
What's 7 and 8?
Oh, I missed 7 and 8. Oh, y'all are paying attention. Technician A says, well, you know that. Number 7 is going to be B, and number 8. Technician A says, carefully labeling the connectors will make them easier to reconnect. You better get you some doggone masking tape and write some numbers or something. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that will save you so much time. I'll tell you something else that works really good that nobody here ever does, except George Reyes. He would do it. Is find all of, and you were talking about this yesterday, find all the little cups and buckets and whatever, coffee cups from, you know, and write stuff on there, manifold bolts, water pump bolts, timing cover bolts. Put those on there. And the guys that are really good are careful and want to make sure that they don't have trouble is whenever and I've worked with guys like this, they'll pull, like if this guy had to put a crankshaft in, when he pulled his 2.8 liter out, he had to pull the, you know, timing components off of it and the crankshaft out. Well, the timing components, he actually took the bolts that held the timing cover on and he started each one in its hole. You know, and screwed it in there a few threads so that the bolts were right there where they were going to go, and it was really easy for him. I had to work behind the guy because he gave his 2 weeks notice, and the service manager said, "Pack your stuff up, get the heck out of here." You know, but I don't know why he did, because that guy was a good mechanic. And anyway, I took and had to work behind him, put that crank back together. But the guy was so easy to work behind because he had put all of this stuff so that it would be easy for him, and because it was easy for him, it was easy for me. See? And think about your next guy on the job. If you're going to put a water pump on one, glue the gasket to the water pump, not the block, okay? I mean, if you glue the gasket to the water pump, the next guy that changes the water pump, the gasket comes with it. He's got very little scraping to do, usually, and then he puts it back together and everything's good. Number
Pull the
9.
bottom of the gasket either.
Number 9. Technician A says the ball joints will have to be separated to remove the axle shafts on a front-wheel drive vehicle. What did I do? I'm sorry, I skipped up the last part of number 8. Technician B said using marking tape or tags to label the connectors. And number 8, let's see, either one of those guys are right. Technician A says the ball joints have to be, yeah, and you know that's true. Technician B says the transaxle must always be removed with the engine. Well, no, it don't. Now, I talked about this the other day. The people, a lot of the guys that I know nowadays that are really good mechanics, if they're going to pull an engine out, they typically pull the transmission out first, and then steam clean it and put plastic over it and put it aside, and they get ready to put all the new seals back in. They put all the seals in the transmission that, you know, are hard to change when the engine's in it, like a torque converter seal or anything like that. And when they get all that done, if you don't, incidentally, if you pull the engine out of one, and I've seen this repeatedly, you pull the engine out of one, and that torque converter's hanging there, you're not even thinking about that. But while you're fooling with the engine and all that you got it out of there, that torque converter is hanging on a seal that's been in there for probably 15 years, and it's all hard and everything. Wasn't leaking when you pull the transmission out. I mean, the engine out. Now when you put it back in, you got a really bad transmission leak. So the smart thing to do is go ahead and jerk the torque converter out, replace the torque converter seal, spin the torque converter back in there, clunk, 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 make sure it's all the way in, and then put it back together that way. But I've seen guys all over the place. They'll have that torque transmission drooping with that torque converter pulling down on that seal. Because the seal, without it being bolted, is not being supported in the front. Make sure you keep that in mind. Number 10. That number 9 is actually an A there. Okay, we're almost through here. Now this worksheet right here, incidentally, the one that I got here is one that some of you guys have already kind of done it, but you hadn't measured the cylinder bore, you know. So that's something that you guys need to know how to measure the cylinder bore. And it doesn't take long. I've got a block over there that's already got the pistons and everything out of it that I can show you how to measure cylinder bore on. So that's a short worksheet. And we got to get caught up on your worksheets, guys. Don't get so complacent with doing your lab work that you don't get your task sheets done, because that's a big part of your grade. To prevent a crankshaft from bending or sagging after removal, what are you supposed to do? Do you store it on its sides, store it under the workbench, store it on its end, store it in a cool place? Stand it on its end.
Oh.
You know, they used to, I was hearing guys used to say those 396 Chevrolet engines, if you laid the crankshaft on the floor wrong and let it lay there too long, it would warp it. Did you know that you can take brake drums? Like if you've got a parts house guy that wants to maximize the space and he stores his brake drums standing up, every doggone one of them will be egg shaped by the time you get ready to put them on. You wouldn't think a piece of steel would change shape just sitting there. Brass bushings will do that. Big, thick, heavy-duty brass bushings like what you use in cranes and bulldozers. If you put those suckers, if you stack them laying on their side, they'll get egg-shaped and they won't work anymore. Now, if you're somebody that wants to sell them for scrap, that may be okay. But if you're going to use them in a place where they're designed to go, don't store them on their side, stand them on the end. That's the thing, you know. The metal will change shape just because of the gravity factor, right? Especially if something has got really tight tolerances and all that. Technician A says when loosening head bolts, the technician should use the same sequence as the tightening sequence. That's what you were doing yesterday when you pull the head off that one. If the sequence is not specified, that's what you're supposed to do. In other words, when in doubt, follow the same, you know. Technician B says torque to yield bolts can be reused if the technician torques them to the original torque plus 5 foot-pounds. That's neither one of those guys. Actually, I like that first answer. I mean, I like what Technician A said. When loosening head bolts, you should use the same sequence as the tightening sequence if the sequence is not specified. Now, see, that's number 11. They're claiming that he's not right. I kind of like that because it kind of keeps you out of trouble, you know. I mean, there's nothing wrong with using that. It's easier just to take your impact if they'll break loose that easy and go zing, 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 you know.
Yeah, well, sometimes I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, that one yesterday that didn't work, did it? We had to really bust our fanny on that one bolt. And how did we do that, Wes? Wes, listen to this. You got a good 6.14 millimeter socket, and you got a nice heavy duty. You know, you're down on there good, and it's trying to slip on the head bolt. And so all the other head bolts pretty much came out. So what you gonna do? This is a good socket now. It's a good thick walled heavy duty socket. You got a knife on her, like that. You got to get it out of there. You got to be a problem solver, man. You know what I mean? So, you ain't never run this before? Oh. Well, you have to rebuild your motors all the time anyway, don't you? Well, I figured a drift car guy would probably be rebuilding his motor every so often, but anyway, this one here did us that way. And we beat on that sucker. You hit it straight on, it'll help sometime. But we got a bunch of valve grinding compound and crammed up in there a lot more than what you use. And we put it down on, made darn sure it was good and tight. And then while were you hitting it? He was either.
I was hitting it with the hammer.
He was tapping it with a hammer while I was pushing on it, you know. And it ultimately cracked and came loose. You know that loud crack they make when they've been so dadgum tight for so long.
Yeah.
And that's always very rewarding when you hear that loud crack, you know. But we got it out of there though. And,
You know,
Technician A says, wait a minute. Yeah, Technician A says before, oh, by the way, that's under the question, number 11, don't use torque to yield bolts again. Don't use them the second time they're supposed to be replaced. If you've got aluminum heads, you're going to have torque to yield bolts typically. That's a rule of thumb, and you're supposed to replace the head bolts. And so, number 12, Technician A says before disassembling the cam timing mechanism, rotate the engine to TDC number 1 exhaust so the timing marks will line up. Technician B says these 6 engine cylinder heads are interchangeable and there's no need to mark their position. D. Now, what was wrong with this? What this first guy said? Technician A says before disassembling the cam timing mechanism, rotate the engine to TDC number 1 exhaust. You probably, and I'll tell you what they tell. I'm going to tell you this: if you've got an engine that's an interference engine, right, what you are supposed to do is you're supposed to turn the crankshaft so that the pistons are halfway down, every single one of them. You know how they're doing this? You want to turn them so that they're all down. That keeps your valves out of trouble. You got that? All right. And then as you're turning them, you're going to turn this thing. You want to have it so that it's 15 minutes reverse engine rotation out of time. And so whenever you are bringing it up to top dead center, you turn it real slow and real gentle up to top dead center. You see, but you're going to have your valves, both of them closed on your number one, and the other ones are where they're going to be on their various strokes. But if you do it that way, you typically won't have any issues with bending any kind of valves. But anyway, when you got an interference engine, you got to be particular how you do that, or you could damage a valve going back in. Just be real careful about that. Rod cap should be marked before what? B, disassembly of the engine. To ensure access to all parts, a removed engine should be placed on an engine stand. And you need to be good at mounting that. I see engines mounted on engine stands out here that the bolts are loose and the little arms that hold the engine and all that. That's just not good. You're supposed to tighten them up good. Vehicles with longitudinally mounted engines usually call for the engine to be removed through what of the engine compartment? The top. Except on a Ford Aerostar. And you will not get that thing out of there unless you come out the bottom of it. You will not do it unless you come out the bottom of it.
Like this much of it.
You're actually supposed to pull the whole dadgum
So far,
powertrain, everything out from under it with a powertrain left, like that OTC thing we got. But I knew a soldier that was put an engine in an Aerostar in his doggone yard. I don't know how in San Hill he did it. I wouldn't have tried that. But he managed to make it work. He improvised and overcame, I mean, he worked that sucker up in there, got it on the mount, stabbed the transmission in it, and did it with no, just by himself, fooling around with jacks and stuff. And, he came over and he said, and I said, how'd you get this motor in there? And he goes, I put it in my yard down there. There's something I am not going to try to do in the yard. You know what I'm saying? I mean, but he flat sure did it. He made it happen.
Yes.
I mean, if you tell somebody they can't do something, they might make a fool out of you because sometimes people don't do it, let's see. To ensure easy access to all parts, Stan, let's see, which one are we on? Oh, number 16. During engine removal, the technician should blank connections and wires to save time during reinstallation. See, we're with these out here, burning them in, label them. We're supposed to mark them. We're supposed to identify them. 17. For safety, technicians should do what to fuel pressure? Relieve fuel pressure. How many of you guys relieve the fuel pressure before you pull the filter off? Is that right? You know what?
I just spray knife.
Is that good?
No.
Do you wear safety glasses? What's up with your bad self? I wore safety glasses. And I've actually I thought I had the fuel pressure relieved, but there was enough heat to where it, built up air pressure in there. And customers standing here watching. I had safety glasses on. I used to have some yellow safety glasses. They had side shields that are real similar to these that I wear right now. And when I took that fuel pressure regulator off, usually I break it off this way because it's got three, you got 3 bolts, and then you release the O-ring. And that thing had so much pressure in there, it just went, I'm talking about like a fire hose right in the face, but it was air and fuel and all that. But I thought I had relieved it, but sometimes you do. That's why it's a good idea to wear these. Even if you think you relieved it, the motor's good, not you may have issues.
Did you jump or you were like, oh?
No, actually, I just laughed about it. I laughed about it because I didn't get anything in my eyes, but the customer was traumatized. He thought that the whole world was coming to an end. To prevent damage to the rod journals when removing the piston and rod assemblies, place a piece of blank line, vacuum line, over the rod bolts. Actually, fuel line is what I always use because it's about the right size, 3/8 or whatever. 19. Now, you know what I'm talking about there. You're just going to put pieces of hose over them bolts, so when you go down in there, it'll go on either side of that journal without. Y'all did that when you built that Crown Vicky engine, didn't you? You put some hose on them bolts, or you just ran, or you had 2 guys working together. You had 2 guys working. Y'all were careful, weren't you? When loosening the main caps, loosen them in 2 stages in the reverse of the tightening sequence. And number 20, to prevent damage to the pistons, blank should be removed before attempting removal. And there's, like I say, you can tell that gal's worked on cars a long time because the ridge, because she's actually reamed ridges like I have. There's another woman that writes really good articles for Motor Age named Vanessa Atwell. I don't know a lot of anything about her, but I know the stuff that she writes is really good. Huh?
Stuff's colored.
You got original paper.
Yeah, you got some colored stuff there. All right, you see this right here?
I got a black.
Yeah, you actually got, the reason for that is you've got the original copy that I copied them with, and that's okay. You can still use that.
Why do I got a blank one?
The reason you had a blank sheet is because I was wanting to make sure that you didn't have one sheet printed on the back of another sheet. That's what that was.
So am I missing?